Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have vowed to take away your Second Amendment rights through gun bans, gun confiscation, and government regulations. Now, Joe Biden is no longer hiding his real intentions, and we need you to take action now.
Whether it's a 9mm pistol or whether it's a rifle, is ridiculous. I'm continuing to push to eliminate the sale of those things. But
the Biden administration is coming after your right to own any gun. Joe Biden has already issued executive orders.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me for his regular Friday visit, Alex Ooley of the Ooley Law Offices in Indiana. Alex, thanks for dropping by today, man.
Yeah, great to be with you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So, one story that I sent to you early in the week that caught my radar and actually made me a little bit upset. I want to go ahead and put this up on the screen. Texas man held at gunpoint by federal agent seeks Supreme Court intervention. I'm going to go ahead and synopsize the story a little bit. Back in February of 2019, Kevin Byrd was his now ex-girlfriend was in a automobile accident, and he drove to a parking lot near there trying to find out some more information, and a guy walks up to him with a gun drawn, and he forced Mr. Byrd to stop. The guy pointing a gun at him said, "I'm going to put a bullet through your expletive-deleted skull and blow your head off," according to his recollection of the incident and in some court filings. And then Byrd said the guy holding a gun on him pulled the trigger. A direct quote from the news story. This is off CBS News. "I've been around firearms a lot, and you don't put your finger on the trigger unless you're going to shoot someone. There isn't a way to know the gun was jammed unless he pulled the trigger." Well, the bad guy's gun had malfunctioned, and the two remained in a standoff with Byrd in his car and the other guy standing in front of it until local police arrived. There is surveillance camera footage of this. It was then that the other guy, Lamb, identified himself to officers as an agent with the Department of Homeland Security and showed his credentials. And I'm going to go ahead and put this up on the screen. This is a screenshot of the video from CBS News. I'm just going to put this up here real quick. You can see there, it's obviously a still frame, but the guy standing outside of a Corvette it looks like he's pointing something at the Corvette. Alex, because going on in the story, it looks like because this guy's a federal agent, up to now he's just gotten off. Well, he's a federal agent. He gets off on this up to now.
Yeah, and it's really, I'm like you, Paul. The facts of this case really kind of upset me and make me incensed. But in my understanding is that Kevin Byrd, the girl was his ex-girlfriend at the time of the accident, and she was in the car with her new boyfriend when it crashed into a Greyhound bus at nearly 70 miles per hour. So it was a bad accident, from what I understand. And so apparently this agent Lamb with the Department of Homeland Security was there to stop Kevin Byrd from investigating his son's apparently drunk driving. Kevin Byrd was at this restaurant to find out what had happened leading up to the accident, and the agent was there to prevent him from investigating this accident and what led up to it. So it's really upsetting whether or not he was an officer or not. But the fact that he then displayed his badge when local law enforcement arrived to show them some level of superiority, probably. I'm not sure what his intentions were there. You can only speculate. But apparently the law enforcement, after doing some investigation and reviewing some security footage, actually arrested Lamb. the Department of Homeland Security agent. And Kevin Byrd sued Agent Lamb civilly and in federal court, and the trial court said that the case could proceed and that qualified immunity wouldn't apply. But the Court of Appeals overturned the trial court decision and said, no, this case can't proceed against Agent Lamb because he's entitled to privilege under the Constitution, under the case law, deriving from a case called Bivens, and we can get into that here in a little bit more. But it's really just an upsetting set of facts that this federal law enforcement officer was trying to prevent an investigation into his son's actions and held Kevin Byrd at gunpoint and apparently tried to shoot him. Luckily, the firearm malfunctioned and Kevin Byrd was not shot. But nonetheless, Kevin Byrd sued Agent Lamb for excessive force and an unreasonable search or seizure. So absolutely sympathize with Kevin Byrd in this case and hope he's able to find some relief at the Supreme Court.
Now, I because I do this every single Monday, it's hard for me not to slip into defensive gun use story mode here, but somebody's standing in front of my car pointing a gun at me. My car is a far better weapon than any small caliber handgun. They haven't identified themselves as police. They're not dressed as an officer. They're pointing a handgun at me. A Corvette's got a guaranteed minimum of 300 horsepower and gearing that is designed for fast acceleration. Guess what, buddy? It's go time. And your shins are secondary. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, Kevin Byrd could. Point. And a vehicle can be seen as a deadly weapon, but if you're facing a deadly threat, you are probably justified in using your vehicle as a deadly weapon in self-defense. So it's an interesting case. Luckily, he wasn't physically hurt, but it'll be interesting to see what the Supreme Court does with this case, because we've talked about qualified immunity before, but primarily in the context of state and local law enforcement. So under United States Code, it's a federal statute.
And we have a freeze up. Goodness. This is the second day in the row we're having this. Let me see. Get this up here. And we totally lost Alex. I deeply apologize that. Let me go ahead and put. We got you back, Alex. I'm sorry.
Okay. Excellent. I'm not sure where I cut out, but I think I was talking about civil rights actions under federal statute under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, and how those cases are meant to address unconstitutional actions by state and local government officials. Well, this case is unique because it was an action by a federal law enforcement officer rather than a state or local law enforcement officer. And so 42 U.S.C. 1983 would not apply in this situation, but there was a case in the 1970s called Bivens that said that individuals have recourse to for a remedy if they are the subject of an unconstitutional action by federal government agents. So since the 1970s, the various federal circuit courts, Intermediate Court of Appeals, have interpreted Bivens to limit those kinds of cases against federal law enforcement officers, and it's nearly impossible to prevail. But there's been some disagreement among the circuits, and so Kevin Byrd is asking the Supreme Court to clarify what the standard is in a civil rights case against federal law enforcement officers. And it will be interesting to see what the Supreme Court decides to do with this case. Because all law enforcement officers are entitled to qualified immunity, but federal law enforcement officers have an extra level of protection because the case law is so restrictive with respect to claims against them.
Yeah. Let me get up a comment here real quick. George says, I'm confused. Was the federal agent fella acting in course of his duties? That's the only way qualified immunity should apply, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and interestingly, the trial court in this case said that his actions were clearly unconstitutional and he was not protected by qualified immunity. But this is not just a question about qualified immunity, it's a question about whether there's a course of action at all under the case law against these federal agents in light of Bivens. So there's a long history of cases following Bivens, and the courts have interpreted Bivens inconsistently, so it's not clear what cases or what standards should apply. Mm-hmm. So it's not really just a qualified immunity question. It's a question about whether there's any course of action against these federal agents.
Yeah. Another question, he says, how many $1 million is Kevin Byrd spending on lawyers? I don't know. I'm certainly hoping he's getting some pro bono help from some,
He's being represented by the Institute for Justice, which my understanding is a nonprofit civil rights litigation firm. They have several offices, but primarily, I think their primary office or their headquarters is in Arlington, Virginia, and they litigate constitutional issues. This is their bread and butter. I think, interestingly, the Cato Institute and I believe even the ACLU, which I'm not always fond of, they take positions that I disagree with often, mm-hmm. but I think they are supporting Kevin Byrd to some degree, at least. But the Institute for Justice is the primary civil rights organization behind this case. So I believe that Kevin Byrd will likely have no legal expenses.
I hope so. I hope not. Let's put it that way. Couple more comments in here real quick. George says, Paul's right. Don't bring a gun to a car fight. And Charlie Chambers says, my Silverado is a 43.5 million grain bullet, if necessary, to exit a threat. Love that. And where did I had one more. To make a little bit of a left turn here on topics, Charlie Chambers says, Ohio Senate passed a constitutionally carry bill. Will it pass and sign into law? As a Michigan Wolverine alumnus, the Buckeyes, hat tip to the Buckeye State. Whoops, and Alex is back. Yeah, Alex, your neighbors to the east there, it looks like they're going to be getting constitutional carry if the governor signs it, and he said he will. Yeah,
I'm hopeful that they will, and I think Governor DeSantis in Florida has said that he would sign any constitutional carry provision that reaches his desk. So hopefully we get a couple more states joining the constitutional carry movement.
Absolutely. Well, the next thing we wanted to talk about, we've used up about half our time, so next thing we wanted to talk about was the Tueller drill, of course named after Dennis Tueller. And as we were talking about pre-show, then y'all can see at least part of a poster behind me. When the last time there was a live NRA annual meeting and exposition was in Indianapolis. That was where I got to meet Alex in person. And I actually, during that same NRA annual meeting, got to interview Dennis Tueller. And he is a fascinating guy and a great interview. The 21-foot rule, man, you wanted to dig into it a little deeper.
Yeah, we brought it up last week when we were discussing the Chad Reed shooting in Lubbock, Texas. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was worth discussing in a little more in depth. So what's commonly referred to as the 21-foot rule, mistakenly called the 21-foot rule. There is no rule, but it's a principle that Dennis Tueller is credited with, because when he was a police officer with the Salt Lake City Police Department, he conducted these sort of informal studies about when an attacker armed with a knife might present a deadly threat to an armed officer. And what he found was that an able-bodied male could cover about 21 feet in a second and a half armed with a knife. And that was about the amount of time that a reasonably trained officer could draw their firearm from their holster and discharge their weapon on target. So the idea was that that an attacker could cover 21 feet in about the time that it would take an officer to draw their weapon and fire a shot. And that notion has come to be known as the 21-foot rule, and is widely called the 21-foot rule, even in the legal community. I've even heard prosecutors use the 21-foot rule mistakenly and apply that rule mistakenly. So I think it's an interesting concept to talk about, and it really goes, I think in terms of training, it helps people understand some context about when someone may present a threat to you. And it's not going to be necessarily 21 feet. It's going to be dependent on a lot of things. And I think this drill helps people think about that and think about the context of a deadly force encounter. And it helps them articulate when someone may or may not be a deadly threat to them based on their skills and the other factors that may be present in the environment. Are there obstacles? Do they have the ability to move? Is the person an able-bodied male or someone with lesser or greater physical capabilities? Are they armed with a knife or some other weapon? There are lots of things that can change the calculus.
Well, and is there a knife in that person's hand at the time? If the knife is a folding knife in their pocket, that's a whole different deal. Because Charlie, I think, is trying to say says better what I was trying to say. Not only is a knife dangerous at 21 foot, a 4-inch long blade can actually stab almost 8 inches via compression into muscle. It's a huge danger if being attacked.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it also makes me think, even if you are able to discharge your firearm and hit the attacker with one shot in that second and a half, the attacker may still be able to use that knife for 90 seconds, maybe more, depending on where they were hit with the shot. So like I said, there are lots of factors that go into the calculus about when somebody presents a threat. And I think that's because, remember, whether or not you're justified in using deadly force is going to be judged based on the totality of the circumstances and whether or not your actions were reasonable in the context of the totality of the circumstances. And the question that has to be answered is whether there was an immediate, otherwise unavoidable threat of death or grave bodily harm to you or another innocent person. And I think this Tueller drill or Tueller principle helps people articulate whether or not the threat was immediate. Because there's this dilemma, right? I mean, if you're faced with the possibility of having to use deadly force, you don't want to shoot too early before the person is an immediate threat because you risk being charged with murder, okay? But you also don't want to wait too late because you risk being killed, right? So it's a difficult situation, and I think helps folks articulate why a particular person may have been a threat to them in that moment.
Larry says a big issue is when it is allowed for cops, it is denied civilians when charging. Yeah, I on this one, Larry, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. If somebody's charging with a knife, I would say, as long as you're in a stand, I mean, New York, all bets are off. New Jersey, all bets are off. But if you're in free America and somebody's charging at you with a knife, I'm pretty sure you could articulate that you are in immediate danger.
Yeah, and Messiah Ayub says, he says, CYA, can you articulate? Like, can you articulate why this particular person was a threat to you and why your actions were reasonable under the circumstances? And uh, you're going to have to articulate not only this concept of distance, but was the person armed with a knife? Were they charging at you? Did they issue verbal threats? There are all sorts of factors that go into that analysis.
I took a active shooter interdiction class at the Firearms Academy of Seattle, and the one of the parts of this class was a force on force course, and I had the pleasure of getting killed twice by Marty Hayes, and he absolutely taught me very clearly by example the 21-foot rule and killed me with a knife 3 strokes before I had a chance to even move. Yeah, the 21-foot rule, that's not a joke, folks. He was able to slice both my wrists and my throat before I was able to clear my holster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another good point too, Paul, about whether or not your firearm is holstered. Obviously, that's going to make a huge difference. Is your firearm already out at the low ready, or is it in a holster? I mean, that's going to change the speed with which you react greatly. So it's an interesting thing to think through, and an interesting, if you've never done the drill itself, it's an interesting drill to try out for yourself. When we teach basic handgun courses, we let students try this drill, and the way we set it up is that typically I'll put my hand on the shoulder of the person who's doing the drill, and I'm armed with a rubber knife, and when I lift my hand, the student who is at the low ready, they're not even holstered, they're at the low ready, will come up on target and fire 2 shots into a paper plate. And on the first shot, I'll drop the rubber knife. On the second shot, I'll stop. And people are often surprised about how far I get before the second shot is fired. So I think it's kind of an eye-opener for beginner students especially.
Ravenwolf says, should be the same for a ball bat. And this is, the Tueler drill is designed on knives, but, ball bat, crowbar, screwdriver, anything that can be used as a a blunt force or stabbing weapon, you could articulate the same thing. It's what the Tueler principle is how fast a reasonably fit adult male can move, can close 21 feet.
Yeah, and I think another interesting thing to bring up here, Massad Ayub kind of frames this immediate danger in the context of what he calls AOJ, the Aoj Triad. And what AOJ stands for is ability, opportunity, and jeopardy, or what we sometimes call manifest intent. Did the person have the ability, that is, did they have the power or a tool of some sort to inflict harm on you? Did they have the opportunity, that is, are they close enough? Are they in a place where they can inflict grave bodily harm on you, death or grave bodily harm? And then, do they manifest intent? Are you in jeopardy? Are they just standing there with no apparent intention of causing any harm, or are they yelling at you threats? Are they saying that I'm going to kill you, you bastard, that sort of thing? So those are the
and we had Alex freeze up again. And here he comes. There he's back.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening today, man.
Yeah, bizarre. We had some storms coming through, so maybe that's got something to do with it. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't think so.
That got me.
Am I coming up? Am I coming through okay now?
And you're hitting me hard. Your signal is very strong. It's just all of a sudden we had an interrupt.
Cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think I don't know if all of my commentary there on Masad Ayub's AOJ triad came through, but just once again, does the person have the ability, the opportunity, and the manifest intent to inflict death or great bodily harm on you or another innocent?
And there's a freeze up. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I think we're going to have to, at this point, with the amount of issues we're having freezing, and he's back one more time. Alex, I think we're going to have to call it. I don't know what's going on, but I think we're going to have to call it with this. We're almost at the bottom of the hour anyway, so.
Okay, that sounds good. The internet gremlins have reared their ugly head once again.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on because it was happening yesterday too. It's got to be a problem on my end. I'm thinking now that happened with Mike yesterday too. So,
okay,
I'll have to see what the issues are. But Alex, thanks for joining us again today, and I look forward to talking to you next week. And he froze. It's happening quicker and quicker. All of you watching, thank you for watching. Come join me at noon Central Time tomorrow for the weekly bullet. Thanks for watching, everybody.